Okay, we're ready to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to panel 26, Reassembling the Pieces, Restoration for Descendants of a Race Massacre. My name is Bernice Bennett, and I will serve as the moderator for this session. So let me just give you some background. In 1915, lynching mobs were searching through the dirt roads of Early County, Georgia, for a man named Grandison Goolsby, killing his family members as they hunted. 108 years later, genealogist Orice Jenkins cold called Grandison's great-granddaughter, Shar Goolsby. After spending 5 years researching her family, he shared the details of her ancestor's life and death in a way that she never heard before. Together, they embarked on a pilgrimage to Early County, where their families had lived since the 1830s. So the panelists will discuss the physical and psychological journey of discovering this information. As a family historian, Orice has gone through the work of identifying each of the victims and survivors of the massacre and contacting their descendants, reuniting relatives that had been separated for generations. As a student of clinical mental health counseling, Shar is developing a plan to build an inclusive wellness retreat center in Early County. Shar is developing a plan to build an inclusive wellness retreat on the same land her ancestors walked on. So let me just start this panel discussion with Orice Jenkins. Welcome, Orice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bernice. And hello to everybody at William and Mary. I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to give you basically an overview of what happened in this event and what happened to my family and Shar's direct ancestors. And I have a book coming out about this event in July. So this is the title of the book, The Early County Massacre, Goolsby versus the State of Georgia. This is how it all started for me. There's all these newspaper articles about this event. It was truly a major event. It was covered in every newspaper in every city in the country. And I've started collecting so many articles. There were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And I wanted to even show that even in Virginia, this is the front page of the Virginian Pilot, which was based in Norfolk. So, and here in the second column from the left is the article about what happened in Blakely, Georgia. So what happened? Let's start with the main people that are involved. Grandison Goolsby, as Bernice mentioned, his wife, Mary Hutchins Goolsby, and their two oldest children. They have 4 sons, but these are the 2 oldest. Now, I grew up in the North, so I pronounce this Ulysses Goolsby, but I've also learned that people pronounce it Ulysses Goolsby. And if you go down south in places like Pahokee, Florida, where a lot of my family lives, and in Blakely, they just say Ulysses. So I'm going to try to be true to the pronunciation that his family used, and I'm going to try to call him Ulysses Goolsby. And he was the oldest brother. And then his next oldest brother was Mike Goolsby. And Mike Goolsby is the grandfather of Shar, who you will hear from next. So here's what happened. Ulysses Goolsby, the oldest son, he was trying to go to a wedding. So he lives in this yellow box here, Grandison Goolsby's house, and he's trying to get to the Oak Grove Church, which is in this green box down here. And I created this map just for the book so people can get a sense of exactly where these locations are and how they kind of moved. Ulysses first had to pick up his girlfriend who lived at Charlie Given's house. It was Charlie Given's little sister. So he's coming down. It's been raining all day, and his father wouldn't let him go. But finally, the rain stops. He's able to go to Charlie Given's house to pick up his girlfriend. He also picks up Lilybelle Givens was her name, and also her sister and another young man. And keep in mind, Ulysses is only about 17 or 18 years old at this time. As he goes to the church, he meets on the road this white man named Henry Villapie. Now, Ulysses is in a buggy, a mule and buggy that supposedly was the Cadillac of its day. That's what I've heard from people that knew him, that it was a very, very nice buggy. And I don't know if Henry Villapie's buggy was as nice, but he was very upset to see this young Black teenager joyfully going to a wedding. And I guess the custom was for, a Black person riding in the road to get out of the road and let the white person pass. But Ulysses did not do this. There was enough room for both buggies to pass. Henry Villapie did not like that. And before they even got close to each other, they were about 50 feet apart. Henry Villapie got out of his buggy with his pistol and put it up to Ulysses' head for staying in the road. Thankfully, Henry Villapie had two young men in his buggy, and they actually stopped him from killing Ulysses right there. And Henry Villapie instead said, "Give me my buggy whip." And he got his, the buggy whip and actually struck Ulysses with it several times and caused a huge gash on the left side of his face. After that, the white man, Henry Villapie, just kept on going. He was on his way to Albany, Georgia, and Ulysses did not end up going to the wedding. He decided to go back to Charlie Given's house, take everybody back home. He had to put some turpentine on his face, I guess, to help the gash that was there. And then he just went back home. Later that night, Grandison found out what happened, Ulysses' father. So this is the next day. Grandison actually talked to his son about what happened. And when he found out what happened, he told Ulysses and Mike, we all, the three of us, need to go to this man's house and find out why he hit Ulysses. And the two young men, teenagers, they did not want to go, but their father said, no, we have to go and confront him and find out, why would he hit you like that? And keep in mind, these were very important people in the county. I'm talking about the Black family, the Goolsbys. They owned a lot of land. They were trustees of the church. They were in charge of the fraternal orders in the county. So it was very unusual for Grandison to understand why somebody would hit his son, especially this Henry Villapie, who was a total stranger to the county. So Grandison, after breakfast, he takes his sons, they leave, they go to Blakely. He handles some business in Blakely. That's the county seat. We don't really exactly know what business he handled in Blakely, but we know he did something that's relating to what's about to happen. He then goes to Charlie Given's house, same place Ulysses was yesterday, and that's because Charlie Givens knew where Henry Villapie lived. So that's this blue box right here, again at Charlie Givens' house. And then they go a short 2-mile ride to Henry Villapie's house. And there is where things get crazy. When Grandison hails for Henry Villapie, he doesn't even knock. He's still in the road and just calls out, "Mr. Henry, are you home?" Henry Villapie comes out, recognizes Ulysses and the scar on his face, and immediately starts shooting at the Goolsbys. So I'll say, thankfully, Henry Villapie missed all of his shots missed, but Grandison also thankfully had a gun or two in his buggy, and he was able to retrieve those guns as Henry Villepigue was shooting, and Grandison shot back. And I've heard Grandison was one of the best marksmen in Early County, and he certainly hit Henry Villepigue. Um, Henry Villepigue ends up collapsing, but as he's doing that, he's running back to his house to get his other gun from his wife. But by the time he gets in the house, he's already collapsed from his injuries. He does pass away. The Goolsbys immediately evacuate to their home. These are some of the white people that were alerted in Blakely. You know, all they were told from Henry Villapigue's wife is that 3 Negroes rolled up and shot my husband in the back. And that's all they needed to hear. They organized what they called searching parties, but they were really lynching mobs, and they were posses that were quite murderous. And they didn't really care exactly who they killed. But their goal was to kill Grandison, Ulysses, and Mike, and probably Charlie Givens too. So now I'm going to talk about some of the victims of this massacre that were the result of that murderous rage from these posses. The first death was Simon Goolsby. This was Grandison's baby brother. I don't know if they thought they were shooting Grandison at the time or what they thought, but Simon was the first person killed. And I want to recognize this photo of his wife, Laura. And notice she lived until 1979. So I imagine a lot of people in the room there and on Zoom were alive as well in 1979. So think about how close we really are to this tragedy. This woman lived to be 101 years old. And also her son, Clarence Bass, who lived to 2006. So, and he remembered, you know, this happening. He was about 12 years old. Well, actually, he was 11. So the next day, they realized they had not killed Grandison Goolsby, and they began to search every single house of anybody related to Grandison Goolsby. They thought he might have been hiding out with his family. So on the Old River Road, which is kind of the main road of the county, they were searching all the different cabins, and they tried to search the cabin of Grandison's first cousin, Early Hightower. Early Hightower did not allow them to search his cabin, and he defended his cabin with gunfire. But the mob had a lot more guns, and unfortunately, he ended up being killed. And this is him in the census with his aunt, Charlotte Law, who I have a photo of here. And also I want to recognize Charlotte's daughter, Maholby, who they would later call Girly. Girly Harrison was her name. And I actually have her on videotape talking about this incident. So she lived until the 1990s. So again, showing how close we are to this incident, and I'm grateful to have that recording of her talking about it. On the same day, Thursday, and this is now the day after Henry Villepigue was killed, Grandison was finally located at the home of Charlie Holmes. And this was in the same area, kind of. Grandison actually walked from his home to Charlie's house, and they were really close, best friends, grew up together. You know, even their parents were actually enslaved by the same, enslaver, the same slaveholder, Anthony Hutchins. So they were very, very close. And Charlie really defended his friend as best as he could. But the mob, they knew he was there, and they were not letting up. They really, unfortunately, wanted to do harm to really both of these great men, but especially Grandison. Grandison was the worshipful master of the Masonic Lodge, the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge in Blakely. And you'll also see this is the 1912 membership list. Charlie Holmes is also on here as a member. At the time of Grandison's death, Charlie Holmes was his secretary. Um, so actually, let me just go back because I didn't mean to do that. So Charlie Holmes actually was forced to set fire to his house, and that was the catalyst that caused Grandison to evacuate the home, and then that is when they killed him. Also, I should acknowledge that as Charlie Holmes set fire to the house, Grandison still was not giving up the fight because he had his gun with him, and he punched a board through the wall of the house and started shooting at the mob from inside the house. And he was able to hit at least two people, um, one of which uh, was injured for the rest of his life. And Friday, this is the final day of the massacre. Um, the posse, the lynching mob, they were told that Grandison's sons were hiding in another cabin, and they went and burned that cabin to the ground as well and thought they killed Grandison's sons. But in reality, they had gotten away days ago. And they went to where this red dot is in the southern part of Early County because the train station is down there. And Grandison had an uncle that lived in this red dot. That uncle's name was Ed Law. Um, when they discovered this information, they went to Ed Law's cabin and they confirmed that yes, Ed Law, he harbored the Goolsby brothers that night and took them to the train station at midnight, and they are long gone because actually Early County is on the border of Alabama. This is the Chattahoochee River over here to the left. So they were certainly out of Georgia. The train station is right on the state border. And for this, Ed Law and his adopted son, Precious Hall, they were both executed for assisting the the brothers in their escape. This is a photo of the train depot as it stood. This photo is probably from the 80s, but that depot was still standing until about a year ago. So definitely a part of history that I wanted to visually include in the presentation. So Charlie Givens also got away. He ended up in Florida, but unfortunately he was caught, and the Goolsby brothers were also caught in Mississippi. These articles are several weeks later. So the Goolsby brothers, they got away for about 3 weeks, but you have to remember these are two young men. They're about 16 and 18 years old. So they did not have a whole lot of life skills. And they ended up writing a letter asking for money from their father, and they didn't know their father had been killed. So they were all caught and brought back to Georgia. This is a full list of the people that I found were arrested during this incident. You'll note, or well, I'll tell you, all these people are Black. Not a single white person that was a member of the lynching mob or that committed those awful murders. None of those people were arrested. But these 7 Black people were arrested. The one pictured here is Hash Jewel, right here. And this is also his family, his wife, and some of his children. His daughter, Viola, would later marry Mitch Drinkard, which is Cissy Houston's father. So Cissy Houston, Whitney Houston, Dionne Warwick, their whole family is from Early County as well. When the Goolsby brothers were brought back, they were brought to Atlanta. This is a picture of the Fulton County Jail at that time. They used to call it Fulton Tower. Both brothers were arrested for murder and indicted for murder of Henry Villepigue, the white man that had attacked Ulysses, and they were both found guilty. Ulysses was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, and Mike Goolsby, Shar's grandfather, was sentenced to life in prison. Thankfully, they had great lawyers, William C. Monday and Gibson Cornwell, pictured here. They appealed those convictions to the Supreme Court of Georgia, and Mike ended up being acquitted because of this, because there was absolutely no evidence he had anything to do with that, the killing of Henry Villepigue. He didn't touch any guns. You know, there's a debate about whether Ulysses might have shot as well, but Mike certainly did not shoot anybody that day, and also was not even there during the initial attack, trying to go to the wedding. So Mike had nothing to do with it. And the Supreme Court of Georgia, in their opinion, this highlighted part, there is no evidence that the defendant, Mike Goolsby, did anything but sit in the buggy and hold the lines. All he was doing was holding the mule. So eventually, because of in rural Georgia, they only have court twice a year. So it took very long for them to go back to trial. But as they went back to trial, the judge directed a verdict of not guilty for Mike, and he was set free. But his freedom did not come lightly. This is a photo of Mike. I think it's right after he got out of jail, because he just looks so he looks broken to me, if I'm being honest. And again, this is Shar's grandfather, but he spent 683 days in jail. And a few years later, he wrote this. He was deposed in this affidavit, and he said that the sheriff told him to never come back to Early County once he was released from jail. And this must have been very difficult for him because, again, he's from there. Like Bernice said in our introduction, our families have been there since the 1830s. This is almost 100 years after that. So he was never able to return back home. And really, none of his descendants went back to Early County until Shar and I went together last year. And I'm grateful that Mike was able to get married and obviously have kids, which is why we have Shar. And I'm so grateful that she's even alive, because you see what happened in the family and you see how many different situations could have led to Shar not being here. But still, spending 683 days in prison for something you had nothing to do with, I think can have an effect on you. And Shar will get into that when she presents her slides. But Mike ended up passing away still at the age of 41. He had a stroke caused by high blood pressure. So he was very young, still younger than his father. His father was 46. So I just wanted to share that with you, that although his life was saved in that instance, I still think that the effects of this caused his death at 41, and also caused lots of trauma that you can see generationally. And literally, you can see 3 generations of this family that were affected by this horrible incident. All the folks with a cross were those that were killed, so I can fit them all in one family tree. They were all related in one way or another. So I think that's all I have for y'all as far as my slides. And I want to thank you all for listening, and I'll pass it back to Bernice.
Okay, thank you so much for that very moving presentation. And I'm going to move on because Shar, who is a descendant, is also going to speak for some background information. And I did share some basic information on Shar, but she is currently a physical therapist assistant, integrated energy medicine practitioner, and a certified yoga teacher. She is a graduate student at the College of William and Mary, and she's pursuing an MED in clinical mental health counseling with a concentration in military and veteran family trauma. She is also the owner of the Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens, which champions the evidence-based psychotherapy, somatic therapy, energetic medicine, and trauma-informed healing approaches to bolster holistic well-being. So Shar, please share with us what you have to say about trauma and healing.
Thank you, Bernice. And just let me get set up here. Okay. So my presentation will probably answer a lot of questions for many today as it relates to a lot of previously presented information about the impact of racism in America and on us as a collective, and then uniquely based on how we racially identify individually. Aligned with the symposium's mission to address historical injustices against African Americans, this panel explores the question, how do we glean insights from past justice seekers and healers to mend our communities? I will present to you a tangible call to action rooted in the desire to obtain land in the vicinity of the original racial injustice, allowing us descendants to be reconnected to our ancestral land while aiming to revitalize and reconnect the community. Through both government recognition of past injustices and public engagement, our objective is to leverage our call to action as a testament to the enduring strength, wisdom, and sufferings of our ancestors. Inspired by my own generational healing from racial trauma, our call to action is an attempt to establish a safe space that is anti-racist and promotes healing from trauma in the vicinity of where my family once lived. So this is a photo of the men Orice just told you about, and to the right is another picture of my grandfather, Mike. And every time I look at this photo, I always wonder if he ever smiled again. And I'll move into, as Orice mentioned, the impacts of trauma, but this was something that it always sticks out to me. This is my dad, the peace officer. He was my first hero. He was drafted into service and divinely redirected from his last mission to Laos. He received an honorable discharge from the Army at the beginning of the Vietnam War. His military ethos was deeply ingrained in the way he raised me and my sister. And at 87 years old, that ethos continues to be deeply influential in his life. He's the deacon, and that's the church where I was baptized. So a lot of my talk, as I said, will be through the lens of a trauma therapist and will also include the results of generational patterns and the impact of trauma, because that has been my experience. I share my story to help normalize the story of probably most of us here today, and it supports my call to action, which follows ancestral patterns of serving the community through healing and sustainable farming. So my story, I have always been a sensitive person. And when I was about 5, I would get these, or I started getting these rashes on my arms. And my mom took me to the dermatologist. And as soon as he saw my arms, he immediately knew it was eczema and diagnosed me with anxiety. And one of the reasons why I selected William and Mary's counseling program is because it was the only program that I could find that offered a foundation in treating military and veteran family trauma. One area of focus for me as a trauma therapist is something that's called ancestral trauma, intergenerational trauma, generational trauma. And when an individual experiences trauma during the developmental stages of childhood, it can alter the development of that individual's nervous system, which results in diagnoses such as eczema, ADHD, ADD, anxiety, depression, and some personality disorders. So typically when someone speaks to us in a casual setting about traumatic experiences, we may experience a flood of thoughts and rationalizations on what should have been done or what could have been done. And of course, there's always thoughts and prayers for those who experience the trauma. When we conceptualize trauma, it can look like this, just a bunch of words on a page, random thoughts, labels and descriptors floating around in our head. But trauma is so much more than just words on a page. And it shows up in so many ways, and unfortunately in behaviors that cause the public to typically ask questions like, what's wrong with that person, instead of what happened to that person. We typically equate PTSD solely as the experiences of persons who have served in the military. but it can be the result for anyone who has experienced a significant life-altering event. We have been taught culturally to consciously dissociate and disconnect ourselves from what is the full impact of painful moments. Don't talk about it, suppress it, push it to the side. But traumatic experiences impact our entire being, as well as create an environment that supports genetic modification. Simply stated, deeply painful experiences create an environment, deeply painful experiences perceived by an individual as traumatic impacts the health of that individual and can be biologically passed down to the next generation. This is a very breakdown of research made available through the study of epigenetics. So one counseling approach is something called attachment theory, and that teaches us that the generational transmission of attachment patterns is very real. And that means if we aren't actively pursuing a different path, we will show up in many of our relationships with the same patterns as our parents or our caregivers. The way our primary caregivers were attuned to our needs is what helps us learn how to emotionally regulate our nervous system. A lack of the necessary attunement and attachment during our preverbal development can contribute significantly to children experiencing problems such as, again, ADHD, anxiety, depression, impulsive behaviors, and other mental illnesses. So in 2013, researchers provided us with this image that you see, and it shows how we experience emotions in the body. Traumatic experiences impact our entire being, as I mentioned earlier. And here we see images of how those emotions may look. And what I see a stark contrast in is you'll notice depression is really cold, blue, and then you see happiness is warm and yellow. To me, that's just what I get it. And something else you'll see here is a quote by Mark Wolin, and he is a psychotherapist and director of the Family Constellation Institute. He has been researching the topic of family trauma and how inherited family trauma impacts us. And in his book, It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle, he provides numerous case studies from his clients to illustrate how inherited family trauma can manifest in different ways, including, again, anxiety, depression, ADHD, addiction, and other physical ailments. So why is this even important? Why does it matter? Well, here's my dad, and these are his siblings. And out of these 6, these 4 individuals here all passed of some form of cancer, and they were all different forms of cancer. So me having a healthcare background, and of course my doctors being curious and wondering, what is the significance of this? Is it important? And what do I need to know? There's got to be a connection, whether it's environmental or genetic. And epigenetic studies of trauma have shown us that there is definitely some kind of connection. So here you'll see a breakdown of ancestral trauma. And as mentioned earlier, attachment theory gives us a foundation of how generational patterns of behavior can develop. Intergenerational trauma, ancestral trauma is something many of us carry unconsciously. Research on the topic describes a system in which direct traumatic experiences of the first generation can influence the health and development of future generations. Each one of us are either unconsciously repeating the patterns of trauma, or we're carrying the burden of breaking the pattern of the trauma. This trauma can again manifest as anxiety, depression, perfectionism, burnout, ADHD, etc. You see it on the slide. So the words that I highlighted in yellow are highlighted to demonstrate the shared racial and cultural impact of the experience of ancestral trauma. So using depression as an example, in a study published by NIH in 2022, researchers studying the intergenerational impact of structural racism and cumulative trauma on depression found that the frequency of suicidal thoughts and behaviors often associated with depression is increasing among African American youth. A national sample of U.S. high school students from 1991 to 2017 found that African American adolescents have experienced a 73% increase in suicide attempts, while the suicide attempt rate decreased 9% amongst white youth during the same period. Further, the suicide death rate among Black children ages 5 to 12 is increasing faster than any other racial ethnic group in the US. These are frightening statistics. While researchers have described how social determinants affect depression across the life's course, little attention has been paid to how structural racism and its consequences may contribute to the generational transmission of depression. So something else that you see here frequently is the acronym ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences. These are adverse experiences that children under the under 18 years of age have experienced. Studies define ACEs as emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, emotional and physical neglect, witnessing violence against mother, parental separation or divorce, and living with household members who were ever incarcerated, had mental illness, or were suicidal or misused substances. Expanded ACEs studies also include experiences of racism, bullying, low neighborhood safety, community violence, and living in foster care as additional forms of childhood trauma. Individuals with 4 or more ACEs have been found to be at the highest risk for or have experienced negative health, social, and behavioral outcomes in adulthood. Further, a longstanding body of evidence indicates childhood exposure to intimate partner violence and other forms of abuse is positively correlated with perpetrating various forms of violence across the course. Trauma exposure is increased with increased healthcare use and costs, and PTSD has been associated with a greater likelihood of mood and anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, and personality disorders. PTSD is also associated with increased morbidity and greater use of healthcare for physical ailments compared to those without PTSD. So what is the solution? Well, as depicted in this image by Jacob Lawrence, we go forward. This is Harriet Tubman, and she's also one of my heroes, and she was directed to go forward. And I just like to include this because this is just one of my favorite pictures. So what does forward look like on a micro and macro level? Well, one way, as mentioned earlier, is continuing to hold discourses on the legacies of slavery, being enslaved, and the legacies of colonialism that fed the intolerance for multiculturalism and identity. When it comes to generational trauma, you're either unconsciously repeating the patterns of trauma or you're witnessing others repeating the trauma, and you make a conscious effort to do it differently, but you just don't know how. So throughout my presentation, you may have noticed the quotes that I selected, and these are words of some of my heroes, past justice seekers whom I admire greatly. Whether we identify as Black American or white American, we all have ancestral wounds to heal as a result of the legacies of American slavery and colonialism. My primary desire is to procure land and evolve a sustainable business structure that fosters healing, economic progress, and comprehensive community development in the county in which my great-grandfather was murdered. This will aid to protect futures while preparing a space for healing of trauma. So as mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why I picked William and Mary for my degree is because of its specialized focus on military and veteran trauma. And here's just some data on one statistic, MST, military sex trauma. And this is just based on the experience of women veterans. So there are approximately 2 million living women veterans in the United States. And for those 2 million veterans, there is very limited access to specialized trauma programs offered through the VA. This demonstrates the VA's inability to provide sufficient care and a high need for program expansion into the private sector to allow greater access for women veterans. The VA is working to improve this access, and through the Center for Women Veterans, a Women Veterans Outreach Program, they are seeking to explore relationships with partners and stakeholders to expand access to communities across the United States. And Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens would serve as a potential partner for expansion to access to necessary resources. The micro level issue of mental and physical health challenges is further amplified by macro level factors like limited access to physical and mental health care resources through the VA. So I selected the DeBakey VA Medical Center in Houston because it's one of the few centers that offers what it seems to be most of the trauma-specific programs through the VA. But here is just some statistics based on that availability. So veterans with mental health conditions, including PTSD or substance use disorders, often have long wait times for treatment and support services. The lack of education, the difficulty translating and transferring military skills to civilian jobs, the limited job prospects resulting from macro level circumstances exacerbate the difficulties faced by veterans in achieving stable and sustainable employment. This aids in perpetuating the cycle of veteran homelessness. So the business model of Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens addresses veteran homelessness, offers employment opportunities, and military to veteran supportive services. It is tailored to meet the specific needs of veterans, supporting healing and family reintegration, while providing a wellness space that the community can also gain benefit, in addition to all the other benefits that you see listed on this slide. So I would ask you to please enjoy this brief video just to gain a better understanding of the concept of Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens.
Can't hear it, Shar.
Oh, thank you. Let me pause. I forgot to share my sound.
She grew up in a military family. Daddy's little girl. He was her hometown hero. His call of duty caused him to miss important moments in her life, creating emotional distance and disconnection. This family's commitment to service includes the challenge of regaining stability and cohesion, one side effect of multiple tours and redeployments. With family members in the Air Force, Army, and National Guard, a rich tapestry of military experiences surrounded her upbringing. Following the path of her family's legacy of courage and honor, she dedicates her life to serving her country, gaining the knowledge and skills to excel in leadership and rank. While deployed, she encounters a series of experiences that would leave an indelible mark on her psyche, unraveling a tapestry of symptoms emblematic of invisible wounds such as PTSD. Imagine a space nestled in a rural community on the outskirts of a small town. Welcome to Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens, a nonprofit cooperative that aims to provide an array of holistic and evidence-based therapies for anyone who is served and their relatives. In addition, is a residential trauma recovery program providing therapeutic interventions to meet the specific needs of women veterans. Opportunities for career counseling and career development are offered to newly transitioning service members from military service into civilian life. The project's phased evolution will kickstart with establishing eco-friendly, sustainable farming, supporting endangered local species, and acting as a vital food source for communities within 150 miles. Concurrently, we'll launch housing and vocational programs tailored for service personnel transitioning into civilian life, supporting family reintegration in a nurturing environment. Inspired by various successful programs and drawing from traditional and alternative healing modalities, we strive to address mental health challenges, offer safe housing, build social networks, and facilitate career development while providing a supportive space for family reintegration after deployment. We will operate as an anti-racist community in an underserved area, improving overall health outcomes while also contributing to local economies. We are dedicated to fostering deep healing and resilience, and we strongly support reintegration among military personnel and their families.
Thank you for your presence and attention. I hope my presentation has inspired you to explore your own family's patterns of behavior and illness. And I hope you're inspired to support the development of Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens. Thank you.
Thank you, Shar. And I just want to remind everyone that Shar is a descendant of the individuals involved in the massacre. So let me just take it back to Orice for a minute, because he gave us some very traumatic, what I consider research, in which he took 5 years to find this information about what happened in Early County. And of course, Shar is taking us to another level, because she's looking at the creation of the Leap of Faith Healing and Sanctuary Gardens. So Orice, what motivated you to even look into this massacre?
Well, I've always been fascinated with Blakely, Georgia, where this all happened. That's my grandmother's birthplace. And my mom and I finally got to go to Georgia for the very first time in 2017. It's only 7 years ago. And when I got there, we went to a family reunion in Albany, and we told the cousins there that we're going to Blakely. We're so excited to go to Blakely. And the cousin told me, okay, when you go to Blakely, you have to ask about the Grandison uprising. That's all she said. I don't know what she was talking about, but she was talking about the Early County Massacre, what I now call it. A lot of people call it the Grandison Goolsby War or the Grandison Goolsby Scrape, but I call it the Early County Massacre. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but the reason she knew about it was because her aunt, Charlotte Goolsby, Charlotte Reynolds, actually married a Goolsby. And Charlotte actually moved to Hartford, Connecticut, which is where I'm from, and shared this story with her family members in Hartford. So that's how I found out about it. And I realized, oh, wow, I have a connection to this. Also realizing that one of the other survivors, Clarence Bass, who I talked about, he was married to my Aunt Eva. And my Aunt Eva is the reason that my family came up north anyway. That's the woman that brought my grandmother from Blakely up to New York City. So just those connections and realizing, wow, this is a really important event that, you know, you think about all the other massacres that are similar that happened around that time in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Rosewood, Florida, in Elaine, Arkansas, in Chicago, and all these other places. I never saw Blakely included in that list. And there's probably an event like this in all the towns in America, especially, you know, these specific race massacres where they were attacking families and groups of people, Black people that had built things for themselves, had their own, were self-sustaining people. You know, they were attacked, but that was never taught to me in school as a child. So to share not just what the horrible things that happened, but I also share in my upcoming book about what they were able to build before this happened and how they were building schools, building the Masonic lodges, building the churches, all these wonderful things, and owning their own farms. The Goolsbys owned about 700 acres of land. All those things that, you know, were never taught. It felt I felt like it was important for me to share that information with as many people as possible, especially the descendants like Shar.
And Shar, when you connected with Orice, what did you know about this massacre?
Well, all we really knew, so it wasn't the full truth of the story. The only thing we knew was a white man hit his son. He went to the house to apologize, and we were told that he shot this white man because he refused to apologize, and that he had sent the family ahead to Atlanta to be safe because he, you know, of whatever the repercussions were of confronting this white man. That was what we knew, but I didn't know the detail. I didn't none of that until I met Orice last year.
And so just actually listening to what Orice had to say, how did that make you feel?
Oh, that was a whole journey in itself. I feel very connected to my grandfather. I feel like I share some of his energy, and I have always felt disconnected. I grew up in Atlanta, but it never felt like home. I've always felt like an outsider, always felt like I didn't fit in, didn't belong. And it helped, especially going and visiting Blakely, it helped me connect with identity. But it also, just at one moment, I had to allow myself to grieve and experience the emotions that my family members didn't know about, haven't been able to experience for generations, you know, all of that suppression and family secrets, and it impacts us all. And so I had to allow myself to experience it. I felt it in my body, you know, the tears, all of that. I allowed myself to feel it. But I told Orice once before, because he was talking about telling the story and re-traumatizing me, and I said I have to experience because they couldn't. So I allow it to heal through me.
Mm-hmm. And so there's a question in the chat. Did the knowledge of what happened contribute to you to move and mitigate the effects of your, what is this? Did the knowledge contribute to or mitigate the effects of her ACEs?
I don't know. I think the lack of knowledge contributed to it. It impacted me regardless, because I also have ADHD. I feel like the knowledge of it actually helped me heal and helped me be able to reconnect and attached with my family. Counseling helped me heal from my ACEs.
Okay, okay. And so, you're talking about the military and veteran family trauma. And how do you connect that to the trauma that Orice has brought up through this research and the development of the Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens?
One of the connections is because my dad was in the military and I didn't understand the impact of growing up in a military family until I started my military courses at William and Mary and started engaging with other people who grew up in military families and hearing from a classmate who was, I can't remember his rank, but he was like, "Oh, you're describing like my soldiers," and I would talk about my dad. So one thing, we all understand trauma and we can all relate to trauma when we look outside and think of what a veteran has experienced going to war, in the military, the tragedies of that. But we really don't typically understand our own experiences of trauma. And so for me, I'm just highly passionate about the military, but it's also a multicultural organization. Everyone of every race is in the US military. So there's also this understanding of the need to be multicultural, expressive, the impact of the suppression of my culture, whether it's European, Celtic, indigenous, whatever, or roots based in Nigeria and how I choose to practice my spirituality. We're all impacted, but the one common thread is the majority of us support our military. To my understanding, I definitely do. We totally understand and value what they do for us and all of our freedoms. And so to me, this is just a common thread to get everyone to acknowledge and be able to, oh, let me look at my own stuff kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that Orice brought out, and we had a really good idea of the amount of time he spent with this research, which he said 5 years, and I'm sure there's even more information to be uncovered. But Orice, what kind of advice or recommendations would you give to others that are going on a similar journey as you did in uncovering this? Because you said, this was not public knowledge. You don't see commemorations taking place like some of the other known massacres. So what advice would you give to others?
The first thing I would say is make sure you take an account of all the different sources. As we know, as genealogists, we get conflicting information and all of it matters. So I'm not going to value a newspaper article more than I'll value the videotape of the woman that was there. I'm going to take it all into account, all the oral history into account. And also, I'm going to do genealogy. I think it's important that we look at these incidents through a genealogical lens because you'll be able to understand on a personal level what happened to these people. If I see Mary Goolsby on the 1920 census listed as widowed, I have to see, okay, what happened in between 1910 and 1920 that led her to, not just her, but her sister-in-law and all these other people in the family. Why are they all of a sudden widowed in the 1920 census? Well, there's a reason for that. Also, the newspapers, I want to go back to the newspapers. Every single article I found, well, I won't say every single article, but most of the articles had completely different information. So I had to read each one, and I got a little piece of a nugget from each piece. But I will say that the best information came from the articles that were close to the area of Blakely. So, like from the Early County News, which is Early County is where Blakely is the county seat. Also, Tampa Bay Times, and that's because the plantation that Henry Villapie was killed on was owned by somebody from Clearwater, Florida. So the Tampa paper had closer inside information, as well as the Atlanta Constitution and lots of other newspapers that are kind of in that Florida, Georgia, Alabama area, that's what I kind of focused on for information before I spread out to the nationwide coverage. So I'd say just, make sure you focus on those areas and then spread out, and also use genealogical sources because that's where you're going to find the more personal information about people.
Right. And you have mentioned a couple of times that there's a book coming out. So tell us about your book.
Great. So my book will be released through the History Press, which is an imprint of Arcadia Publishing. That'll be July 22nd is the release date, the publication date right now. And it takes you through the entire story. And it's not just about the killing. It's about everything around it. It's about the community. The Pleasant Grove community is what it was called. And my ancestors are in it too. They were there as well. So it goes into all the land that the Goolsbys owned. It goes into, of course, the events that led up to the massacre. But, I even talk about the couple that was getting married, that Ulysses was trying to get to that wedding. I talk about that couple. I have pictures of that couple, pictures of everybody I could find. People you see behind me, all those photos are in the book as well. And these are all people that either survived or were killed in the massacre. So I also then, after the events of the massacre, I tell the story of the trial, Goolsby versus the state of Georgia. It's really two trials because both Ulysses and Mike were tried, and that case lasted for 5 years. So I'm glad that I spent 5 years working on this. They had to spend 5 years in jail, and Shar's grandfather spent 2 years, but Ulysses spent much more than 2 years in jail, but 5 years fighting this case where it went all the way up to the governor of Georgia. So I take you through that entire case. I also published the transcripts from the case. They will be in the book as well as charts of the Goolsby's land, a list of the Masons, which has never been published before. I have 3 membership lists of that Masonic lodge that Grandison was a founder of in 1891. He was a founding member of that lodge. And I have other historical information about Early County, including even slavery information, because like I said, a lot of these families that were involved, they were together during slavery too. So there's even genealogical information in the book that will help a lot of my family members and Shar's family members that all come from Early County.
All right. Wow. So there's a question, and any of you are welcome to raise your hand if you want to ask questions. But there's a question from Karen Lowe, and she is saying, since Dr. Shelley and Dr. Jawan are working with WikiTree volunteers to connect Black communities, would Orice and Shar want to help connecting the Goolsbys and their community on WikiTree? She'd love to help.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I hadn't considered that before, but I think it makes perfect sense so that this information that I've collected is more accessible to people, and they can get on WikiTree and see these communities that, Shar and I just met, but our families have been connected for hundreds of years. So I think it's really important that we can share those connections out as much as possible. So thank you, Karen.
Right. And although you're saying that you just met, what about all the other Goolsbys out there? I mean, could there end up being a connection with all of those others that may not even be aware of what has happened in Early County, but that information is coming out now?
Right. I expect to see quite a few people reach out to me and Shar. Shar also, by the way, wrote the foreword in my book. So I'm very, very excited about this project because she's a part of it as well. And I know that people are going to be reaching out to us and say, hey, I have a similar situation and my family name is Goolsby and they're from somewhere in Georgia. I'm like, okay, come on in. We're going to figure it out. So yes, I expect that to happen.
Okay. And, Shar, you mentioned the epigenetics research. And just if you would just kind of recap again some of the information that you shared, because we're going through this whole this book, this incident, which is so traumatic. But when you think about epigenetics research, what impact will even just getting that information mean to people, and how may it manifest and how they begin to think about themselves, because this trauma is now becoming their reality?
I would say for people to look at their own experiences, their own individual experiences of anxiety, depression, or neurodivergence, which simply means your nervous system developed different than the normal person. I don't like to use that word, but things like ADD, ADHD, if you're highly sensitive, noise sensitive, texture sensitive, things like that, explore that, especially if it was something that developed in childhood and there's no like obvious source of some kind of negative experience. Like I was 5 when I'm just having rashes. Like what is, there was nothing going on. I had a great childhood as a kid. So stuff like that is room to explore what's the deeper connection. So there's, to me, always a psychological and emotional connection, and epigenetics is just demonstrating that. Another presenter mentioned earlier, there's a researcher, a Jewish researcher. Her name is Rachel Yehuda. She's also, I believe, a psychotherapist. And in her research, she has began to isolate the gene, the specific gene that has been altered by the experiences of Holocaust and how that is showing up in their descendants. That hasn't been studied for descendants of slavery, but I think if it was, we would start to see also genetic markers. And that's what epigenetics is. That's just way over here. So I can't really do a great detail of explaining.
Sure.
But there are people such as Bruce Lipton. He is a cellular biologist. He's done a lot of work with it. As I mentioned, Mark Wolin, he's studied family generational trauma patterns. I just read the research. So yeah.
Well, it's helpful to read and understand the research and then to share it with others, of
Yeah.
which you have chosen to do today. Just as a reminder to everyone, now the Leap of Faith Healing Sanctuary and Gardens, we are talking about Early County, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to put it back. I want to put it there because I feel that would help to bring healing to that space, while also providing us a space for us ancestors to be able to convene and have family reunions, functions. But it could be a space that everyone within the community can benefit from. It's designed to be a nonprofit cooperative. So it's not about trying to make $1 million or something off of this. It's literally designed to continue the practices of what my family has always done, serving the community, whether it's, as you saw, my dad, he's the deacon. My great-grandfather was one of the members of Pleasant Grove Church, being involved in these organizations, benevolent organizations such as the Masons. I come from a family of healers. I come from a family of teachers. That's just me, just continuing to do what we've always done. And I just would like to be able to restore that space to make it more, maybe a healing space and not connected with such trauma and tragedy.
Okay. Well, I want to just open it up for anyone that would like to either speak or put your question in the chat room, or the question and answers. Just go right in there and I'll see your questions, and then I'll repeat the question that you have asked. Any comments?
We have about 4 minutes before we have to wrap this session up.
Okay, so we have about, thank you so much. Any questions?
Yes.
It's coming. Yes, I noticed that in the newspaper or in the announcement for the Masonic Lodge, Goolsby was spelled Goalsy. And then in other places you see it as the Goo. Why, is it shown, as your book as the Goo rather than the Goal?
So the GOO is the correct spelling. And what you saw came from the Grand Historian of the Lodge in Georgia, the Grand Lodge of Georgia. And that is certainly a transcription of probably some handwritten documents where they thought that the second O was an A. So that's how that person decided to rewrite that. But it's definitely two O's. There's no A in Goolsby. And you'll see, unfortunately, throughout that whole transcription, there are lots of misspelled names. And so when I reprinted them in my book, because I know these people, well, I didn't know them personally, but they're my family members. I fixed the spellings in the book so that people will know this is actually who that is. Even that it only says GR too, so it didn't say Grandison, but I know GR Goolsby is Grandison Goolsby from other record sources.
And Orice, there's a question. How does it feel to have your story shared with a larger audience finally?
Well, I don't know yet. I think it's going to be even more people. This is the first time I'm talking about this in public. So thank you all for being a part of this, because it does feel good to get the information out there. But I just know there's a lot more work to do. This is going to be a lifetime project for me. This is not just a book that's going to happen this year and then that's it. I feel it's my responsibility to do this for the area that my people came from. This is where my family lived there for hundreds of years, and this is something that really, it'll feel really good when the people in Blakely, which they encourage me a lot, but they don't have the book yet. So then once they have the book, then I really want to see what they're going to say about it. And also the rest of Shar's family, that felt great when I got to meet her father. I met him on his 87th birthday and got to share this information with him. So that was a big moment for me. So we'll see what it feels like when the larger audience gets the information as well.
Okay, and do we have any other questions from the audience?
I think we're good. Good. It's almost 4:15, 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I want to
Thank you.
do you all have any closing remarks before we end this session? Orice, Shar?
I'll give it to Shar.
I just want to say thank you. And yeah, just look at your own family patterns and see what you notice.
And this is
That's right.
our final session for today. We have a program tonight. The students will be doing poetry at Lodge 1 on campus at William Mary in the Sadler Center. But this is, you all are the grand finale. So thank you so much. Everybody, this includes
Thank you, everybody.
this information, and we will have all except one of these sessions will be available. They're all being recorded except one. And so they'll be available within the next 2 to 3 weeks on our YouTube channel, so you can revisit, learn more, connect with these wonderful presenters. And thank you so much for joining us for the 2024 Non-Project Symposium. Look forward to the next year.